The documentary film The Devil We Know is out on iTunes. Joining me to talk about it is America's lawyer, Mike Papantonio, who's featured in the film for his work on the case against DuPont and a toxic chemical called C8, which was dumped into the Ohio River Valley. You can also find out more about the film at thedevilweknow.com. So, Pap, since we last spoke about this case, a lot has happened here. And at this point, there is absolutely no doubt about what DuPont knew and when they knew it. I guess maybe to start, for people who don't know, when they hear Teflon, they think we're talking about the end product itself, those nonstick pans. But we're actually talking about a chemical that's used in the production of Teflon. So maybe we start there and sort of how you became aware of this and got involved.
Well, I was hired by an attorney that had worked on this case. He was actually a corporate defense attorney. It's a pretty interesting kind of combination, but he was brought in. He had a family member that was having serious physical problems. And he was actually, and this was 15 years ago, he was brought in to take a look at it. As he started looking at it, he found that people who are raising cattle along the Ohio River or the tributaries along the Ohio River, that the cattle were dying of very specific kinds of illnesses. Birth defects all started looking exactly alike, the way that they would manifest themselves, the cancers that started showing up in people all along the river. And so what he did is he asked me if I would try the case. And so we had a couple of test cases that we started off with in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, which is typically how this is handled. You'll have, in this case, you had 3,000 people that were affected. You actually had 70,000 people that their water was contaminated, but 3,000 people actually were signed up and showed that they had very specific kind of medical issues ranging from gastrointestinal to cancer, to testicular cancer and liver cancer, kidney cancer, which were all consistent with the C8 exposure. Their own documents, DuPont's own documents, showed that they knew as early as the 1970s that this product had the ability to cause cancer, and they dumped it in people's drinking water all along the Ohio River.
Why do you think that this story, which when you consider the amount of people that are in population areas that are touched by the Ohio River, I mean, the number of people affected by this is staggering if you include all of the ways people are affected by this. Why don't you think this story got the attention that, for example, the Flint water crisis did when we compare, strictly speaking, a lot of people were affected by this runoff?
Well, the media didn't have they didn't have to worry about advertisers with the Flint story. There were no corporations that you could point your finger to. There were only politicians that the media could go after. Here, the story was in front of the media, the national media, for about 30 years, and they chose to do nothing because DuPont was such a huge advertiser for them. I mean, they were a massive advertiser for the media. So the trade-off was, we won't talk about this. You keep spending $2 million a year with us on this ad campaign, and we'll let things go. That's exactly what the media did. The media was owned and operated by DuPont for 3 decades. And so that's why this story did not really surface until actually we went to trial, and the jury came back 4 times and hammered DuPont 4 times. And not only said that you did wrong, but they punished them for the conduct was so callous. It was such ugly conduct. And so then all of a sudden the media had to actually be journalists rather than advertising agents for DuPont. And so that's when the story actually started surfacing. The story's been out there a long time. People were drinking this water. People in most cities around the country have it in their drinking water. It's so, as this film shows, the film is, I got to tell you, I've been involved in several documentaries, David. The filmmakers in this, first of all, are huge award-winning filmmakers, but they did so well at the Sundance Film Festival that the folks at Sundance determined that there were 3 films that they needed to help get the word out on those 3 films. This was one of them because of the social and cultural ramifications, the health ramifications of this catastrophe that was caused by 3M and DuPont primarily.
Yeah, I mean, the film is great, not only in terms of how it's produced, and it shows both the kind of personal impact on the victims, it shows the legal process that was going on, and shows how those two things relate. But it's also so important in my mind because what you just described about corporate media's reluctance to cover the story, we have a justice system that, as you know, because of the space you work in, it overwhelmingly focuses on street crime and not nearly enough on corporate crime and also white collar crime. Corporate media mirrors that. Corporate media also focusing on the salacious and sort of neat and compact street crime stories versus these corporate malfeasance stories. So if not from the documentaries and independent media, I don't know how we would even learn about these things.
You wouldn't. No, no, you would not have. That's the interesting thing about it. Here's something that is so ubiquitous. It's just out there in such a broad expanse, as this film talks about. They're even finding it in polar bears in the Arctic. So that shows you that it's virtually in everybody's blood at this point. God didn't put it there. DuPont or 3M put it there. And now, so what the industry did, and the film is very good on showing how the industry captured the EPA. And they not only captured media, they captured the EPA. And they actually were hiring people out of the EPA. They would go to them and say, Joe, we know you're doing this study, but by the way, how would you like to come to work for us for $300,000 a year? You know, you're making 100 now. What do you think? And so all of a sudden, this revolving door started with the EPA, with the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, all up and down the Ohio River Valley. But you mentioned the DOJ. This is the really ugly part of it. Both the Eric Holder administration had all of this information, every bit of it. They had possession of it. They had reviewed it. They chose not to prosecute, even though I've been a prosecutor, and I can tell you, they had so much material that it was virtually impossible for them not to get a conviction of several of the people that were involved in this. But they chose not to because, as you point out, these people, they look different. They're dressed up in suits. You know, they have MBAs. They don't look like the kid on the street corner in a hoodie that goes to prison for life if he's caught 3 times selling drugs. These people were not even investigated by Eric Holder or by Ashcroft. I could go right down the path.
Well, I wanted to ask you about
Democrats,
that.
There was no difference between the way the Democrats handled it and the way the Republicans handled it. It was all about DuPont handing out big amounts of money to all of these politicians.
Yeah, when we would talk to you, including about this case and others, you, during the Obama era, you were very hard on the Obama EPA and on the Obama Justice Department, and correctly so. What's going on with the current EPA and the Justice Department?
Oh, it's worse. I mean, I say it's worse. I don't know that you could have gotten, the last EPA was basically dysfunctional. You know, granted, the people that they had appointed didn't look as bad, but they were corporatist. Now we have, for example, the head of the chief litigator for BP with this new EPA. Chief litigator for BP is in charge of the Department of Justice, the environmental prosecution for environmental cases in the country. He's the guy in charge of that. He was just appointed by Trump, approved by both Democrats and Republicans. The guy is a thug. I mean, as you know, we handled the BP case. We handled them all along the coast here. He's an absolute thug. And so, but now he's in charge of the EPA. So yeah, he made the news. We heard about him, but to tell you there was any real big difference in the appointments of Obama, it would be it's a tough stretch, really, to say, yeah, they sounded better on paper, but when it came to really enforcement, they were really nothing but Wall Street corporatists. They were Democrats, yeah. This guy's Republican, yeah, but he's a corporatist. He's a corporatist environmental agency leader right now. So there's no difference. We want to think, this is different. This film is really good at talking about these issues we're talking about right now. I mean, these people did a wonderful job on this film.
Yeah, there's a scene in the film, actually, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about next, which sort of puts out there the idea that if an individual were to show up at a river or, at a downtown somewhere where people are hanging out and start sprinkling arsenic around, that would be a crime. Like, they would get arrested for that. That would be a very specific crime. But
They'd
that's
go to
effectively
prison.
what corporations, and in this case,
Yeah.
what was happening with C8, is this bigger than a Justice Department? Like, is this more about the protection that corporate entities provide that lead to basically fines being paid and no real people going to prison?
Well, there's there is within the area of the law, there's this really, he's kind of a nut. I mean, he really is a nut. His name is Posner. He's a federal judge up in the Chicago area. And he has engineered and pioneered the way that we ought to review cases. And he came up with the economics of law. Yeah, a corporation may do something completely deplorable. They might kill people. They might poison people and give them cancer. But this idiot, I very easily call him an idiot. He's an egg-headed idiot named Posner. He's a federal appellate court up around Chicago. He said, well, yeah, we're going to kill people, but we have to look at the economics of killing those people. Are people employed at that corporation? So maybe it's okay to kill people. That there's the economy projected because of that conduct. Well, maybe it's okay to kill people. That's the new norm within the federal judiciary, and certainly is the new norm within the Department of Justice. I just can't tell you how bad, I just almost can't put words to how bad Eric Holder was. And we thought he was a hero, didn't we? Oh, he's appointed by Obama. He must certainly is going to look out for consumers, where he didn't. He did not. We see the same thing with opioids. I'm seeing exactly the same Eric Holder footprints on the opioid litigation as I saw in this litigation with DuPont. So go figure. That's just the reality. It's tribal politics is the only reason we say that we're going to preserve him as a hero. He's not a hero.
Last thing I want to talk about, when we last spoke about this, there were sort of two, I believe, major plaintiffs at the time, and there have since been some verdicts. What's the sort of totality of the cases and verdicts so far on C8?
Well, I mean, the verdicts have ranged anywhere from $2 million to $8 million. I mean, if they had DuPont not come out with a first phase of settlement, we would have continued being in trial. Now, the way the settlement is built, for the next 5 years, people coming forward with these injuries have the right to either try them or settle their cases. So it was built with that in mind, because there's some latency to this. You're not exposed to C8 day one and have cancer day two. So there's some latency involved, and that's why these people still have the right to come forward.
You can find out more about the film The Devil We Know at thedevilweknow.com. It's also available on iTunes, and it features attorney Mike Papantonio, who's been talking to us about the case. Thanks, as always, for talking to us.
Thank you, David.